Imagine having all the money in the world, mansions filled with art, jewels that could buy entire cities, and a name whispered with awe in every elite circle of society. Now imagine risking it all for a love so scandalous. It defied the very laws of family and society. Welcome to the astonishing true story of Arabella Huntington, the Gilded Age's most captivating and controversial figure. A woman who began life in poverty, but rose to become one of the wealthiest people in America, only to shock the world by marrying her late husband's own nephew. This wasn't just a romance. It was a seismic event that tore through the rigid world of old money, new fortunes, and unforgiving social rules, revealing the raw power and passion simmering beneath the surface of America's glittering elite. In an era defined by extravagance and restraint, Arabella shattered every expectation. She wasn't born into privilege. She climbed her way to the top through intelligence, ambition, and an almost uncanny understanding of how to navigate the treacherous waters of high society. But just when it seemed she had secured her place among the titans of industry and culture, she made a choice that left everyone breathless. She didn't just break the rules, she rewrote them, forging a bond that blurred the lines between family and desire, loyalty and betrayal. This is a tale of immense wealth, yes, but also of breathtaking nerve. A story about what happens when someone decides that love and power are not mutually exclusive, and that some risks are worth everything. As we step back into the opulent drawing rooms and hushed corridors of the late 19th century, we'll uncover the layers of Arabella's incredible journey. How did a woman with such humble beginnings amass a fortune that rivaled kings? What drove her to make a decision that would scandalize 2 continents? And what does her story tell us about the hidden tensions of the Gilded Age, an age of surface splendor but deep, often painful transformation? This is more than history. It's a window into the human heart, into the timeless clashes between convention and passion, security and desire. So settle in, because you're about to discover one of the most riveting and emotionally charged stories of ambition, love, and audacity ever told. Born into a world of limited means in Richmond, Virginia, around 1850, Arabella Yarrington's beginnings offered no hint of the unimaginable wealth and influence she would one day command. Her family life was marked by struggle. Her father, a carpenter, could barely provide for his wife and children, and the shadow of the Civil War soon loomed over the already fragile economy of the South. This environment of scarcity and uncertainty forged in the young Arabella a fierce determination and a profound understanding that security was not a given. It was something to be built, fought for, and won. Unlike the many Gilded Age heiresses born into mansions, her education was not in finishing schools, but in the hard arithmetic of survival. A curriculum that taught her to be observant, resourceful, and keenly aware of every potential opportunity. The post-war South was a landscape of shattered fortunes and broken aristocracy, a place where the old rules had collapsed and new ones were yet to be written. For a young woman of intelligence and ambition, this chaos was not just a burden. It was a blank slate. While others saw ruin, Arabella began to see pathways. She understood early on that, in a society being rebuilt, charm, grace, and sharp intelligence could be currencies as powerful as any inherited gold. She cultivated these assets with meticulous care, recognizing that her future would not be found in waiting for a rescue, but in strategically aligning herself with the forces of change and progress already beginning to reshape the nation. This ambitious spirit was her true inheritance, far more valuable than any dowry. It was this relentless drive that propelled her forward, pushing her to look beyond the confines of her immediate circumstances. She wasn't content to simply escape poverty. She aimed for a life of significance, a position at the very pinnacle of the social and economic order. Every interaction, every observation, was a lesson in navigating the complex codes of class and power. She was, in essence, studying for a role she was not born to play, mastering the manners and nuances of a world she had only ever been able to observe from the outside, all while never losing sight of her ultimate objective, a life of unshakable security and profound influence. Her path to that unimaginable future began not in a grand ballroom, but in the more practical setting of her mother's boarding house in New York City. It was here, in the parlors of a respectable but unspectacular establishment, that a young Arabella Huntington, now in her late teens, encountered Collis P. Huntington. He was not merely older. He was a titan, one of the legendary Big Four, who built the Central Pacific Railroad, a man whose wealth and influence were literally reshaping the American continent. The power dynamic between them was immense, almost a caricature of Gilded Age disparity. He was the established king of industry, and she was the clever, observant daughter of a boarding house keeper, a position that offered proximity to powerful men, but little inherent status of its own. Their connection was unlikely but strategic. For Collis, Arabella represented something beyond the transactional affairs he could have easily arranged. She possessed a sharp intellect, a graceful presence, and an understanding of the social world a man more comfortable in boardrooms than drawing rooms, perhaps lacked. She was not just a pretty face. She was a quick study, someone who could listen, learn, and potentially become a valuable companion. For Arabella, Collis was the embodiment of the security and influence she had always sought. He was a direct conduit to a life free from financial fear, a life of power and prestige. This was not a simple romantic attraction. It was a complex negotiation of needs and ambitions, where affection and calculation became inextricably linked. She soon became his mistress, a role that was both privileged and precarious. In the starkly moralistic society of the 19th century, such an arrangement had to be managed with extreme discretion. Publicly, she was a family friend, a helpful presence. Privately, she was his confidante and partner, eventually even acting as his secretary, a position that gave her an intimate education in the mechanics of vast wealth, how it was built, invested, and protected. This was her real finishing school. While society matrons were planning charity balls, Arabella was learning about stocks, bonds, and railroad securities. She was gaining a practical, behind-the-scenes mastery of the very systems that governed the elite world she was determined to join, all while living in the shadow of a secret that could have ruined her completely. This carefully constructed facade required constant vigilance. Their relationship was an open secret among the innermost circles of New York and Newport society, whispered about behind gloved hands, but never openly acknowledged. Arabella had to navigate a social tightrope, maintaining a veneer of impeccable respectability while everyone knew the truth of her situation. This dual existence honed her diplomatic skills to a razor's edge. She learned the art of the meaningful silence, the subtle deflection, and the unwavering composure under pressure. She wasn't just waiting for her life to begin. She was in a protracted, high-stakes apprenticeship, building her fortune not through inheritance, but through unparalleled access and a brilliant, observant mind. For nearly 2 decades, Arabella Worsham perfected the art of a dual existence. Officially, she was the widowed Mrs. Worsham, a woman of independent means and quiet dignity. In the hushed parlors of New York's elite, however, she was universally recognized as Collis P, Huntington's mistress, the woman who managed his private world with an efficiency and grace that even his legal wife could not rival. This was a role defined by its contradictions. She wielded significant private influence while possessing no public standing. She commanded the respect of servants and business associates alike, while being denied the one thing Gilded Age society valued above all for a woman: the unassailable title of wife. Her entire life was a meticulously choreographed performance, a balancing act on a tightrope stretched between immense private power and profound social vulnerability. As Collis's hostess and household manager, Arabella's responsibilities extended far beyond the romantic. She was the architect of his domestic life, overseeing his homes in New York and San Francisco with a sharp eye for detail and an impeccable sense of style. She selected art, directed decorators, planned menus for important business dinners, and ensured that every aspect of his private world ran with seamless precision. This was not merely playing house. It was a crucial executive function. In an era where major business deals were often solidified over private dinners and through personal connections, the ability to host flawlessly was a strategic asset. Arabella provided Collis with a refined, cultured, and impressively run home that served as an extension of his corporate power, a soft power tool that bolstered his hard-nosed business dealings. The social navigation required for this life was extraordinarily complex. Everyone in their immediate circle knew the truth, yet the rules of the game demanded that everyone, including Arabella and Collis themselves, pretend otherwise. She attended events where she would have to converse politely with women who would never invite her to their own homes for fear of scandal. She had to master the art of the subtle entrance and exit, of holding a gaze just long enough to convey confidence, but not long enough to invite a challenge. Her survival depended on a steely composure and a diplomatic genius that allowed her to acknowledge the reality of her position without ever verbally admitting to it. She cultivated a persona that was both approachable and untouchable, friendly but never familiar. A woman who seemed to exist just outside the rigid lines of conventional society, making her own rules through sheer force of will and impeccable manners. This prolonged period in the shadows, however, was far from a passive waiting game. It was, in fact, her postgraduate education in wealth management. Acting as Collis's secretary, she was granted a front row seat to the inner workings of monumental fortune building. She didn't just observe, she participated. She handled his correspondence, understood his investments, and learned the language of railroads, real estate, and high finance. This unparalleled access was her true compensation, more valuable than any piece of jewelry or allowance. While other women of her era were taught to be decorative dependents, Arabella was being trained to be a capitalist in her own right. She was absorbing the strategies, recognizing the opportunities, and building the financial acumen that would eventually allow her to not just spend a fortune, but to grow and protect one independently, transforming her from a kept woman into a formidable financial force in her own right. To understand the world Arabella was navigating, we must first grasp the sheer scale of the fortune she was entwined with. Collis P. Huntington's wealth wasn't just substantial, it was epoch-defining, born from one of the most audacious and grueling engineering feats in American history. He was one of the legendary Big Four, a quartet of Sacramento businessmen whose names became synonymous with both incredible progress and ruthless ambition. Alongside Leland Stanford, Mark Hopkins, and Charles Crocker, Huntington undertook the monumental task of building the western portion of the first transcontinental railroad, the Central Pacific. His specific genius lay not in the manual labor of laying track, but in the high-stakes financial and political machinations that made it possible. While his partners often managed operations on the ground, Huntington stationed himself in the East, expertly navigating the halls of Congress in Washington, D.C. to secure crucial government loans and land grants, and masterfully handling the complex, often cutthroat, negotiations for materials and financing. He was the strategist, the relentless force who could bend politics and money to his will, turning a seemingly impossible dream into steel and profit. The financial empire built from the railroads was almost incomprehensible. The government support itself was staggering, offering loans of up to $48,000 for each mile of track laid through the towering Sierra Nevada mountains and smaller but still substantial sums across the flatter deserts. But far more valuable were the land grants, millions upon millions of acres given to the railroad companies, which they then sold to settlers, farmers, and towns, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of wealth. The Big Four didn't just own a railroad. They controlled the very lifeline of westward expansion, setting freight rates that could make or break entire industries and communities. This was more than a business. It was a private enterprise with the power of a sovereign nation, and Huntington's share of this empire placed him among the richest men on the planet. Yet Huntington's ambition raced far beyond the tracks. He understood that true, lasting power required diversification. He poured his railroad profits into a vast network of other ventures, building a fortune that was as resilient as it was colossal. He acquired steamship lines, creating a seamless transportation network that moved goods from train to ship and across the oceans, dominating both domestic and international trade. His investments in real estate were equally strategic, snapping up vast properties not just in booming California, but across the country, anticipating where value would grow next. He had significant holdings in coal mines, ensuring the fuel that powered his trains and ships was also part of his domain. This wasn't a scattered portfolio. It was a deeply interconnected web of assets, each strand reinforcing the other, all designed to consolidate control and generate unimaginable wealth from the very engine of American growth itself. This was the financial colossus that Arabella Huntington had a front row seat to. Her role as his secretary and confidante meant she wasn't just witnessing the results of this empire. She was privy to its daily operations. She saw the correspondence about land deals worth millions, understood the complexities of shipping contracts, and learned how to manage an investment portfolio that spanned continents. The fortune she was associated with was not static old money sitting in a bank vault. It was a dynamic, aggressive, and constantly expanding force of capitalism. Her education was in the inner workings of this machine, providing her with a level of financial literacy that was exceedingly rare for any woman of her time. She wasn't just living off the wealth. She was learning from one of its most brilliant architects exactly how it was built. And yet, for all her carefully constructed respectability, a deep and persistent scandal clung to Arabella Huntington from the very beginning, a rumor that would follow her for the rest of her life and become an inextricable part of her legend. This intrigue centered on the birth of her only child, a son named Archer Milton Huntington, born in 1870. Officially, he was the son of Arabella and her first husband, John Worsham. But in the hushed drawing rooms and private clubs of New York, almost no one believed that was the full story. The timeline itself fueled speculation. Arabella had married John Worsham in 1869, a union that appeared to many as a convenient arrangement rather than a love match. The widespread belief, one that has persisted among historians and biographers for over a century, is that Collis P. Huntington was Archer's biological father, and that the marriage to Worsham was a carefully orchestrated plan to provide the boy with a name and a veneer of legitimacy. This was more than just idle gossip. It was a calculated risk in a society that placed an immense premium on bloodlines and legitimacy. For a woman in Arabella's precarious position, the mistress of a powerful, married man, the birth of a child out of wedlock would have been a social catastrophe, effectively barring her and the child from ever being accepted in polite society. A hasty marriage to a respectable but less prominent man like John Worsham created the necessary shield. It gave Archer a legal surname and a public identity, allowing him to grow up without the brutal stigma of illegitimacy. Worsham himself, often described as a shadowy figure, seemed to fade from the picture not long after the marriage, further cementing the theory that his role was primarily contractual, a business arrangement to protect the interests of the Huntington dynasty before it could officially exist. The evidence, while circumstantial, is profoundly compelling. Collis Huntington's subsequent treatment of Archer was anything but that of a mere family friend. From the moment the boy was born, Collis took an intensely active and paternal role in his upbringing and education. He treated Archer not as the son of an employee or an acquaintance, but as his own heir, immersing him in the world of business, art, and culture from a very young age. Collis financed Archer's elite private education and, most tellingly, later made him a principal heir to his colossal fortune, bypassing other relatives who might have had a stronger legal claim. This was not merely generosity. It was the action of a father securing his son's future, ensuring that the boy he believed was his own would inherit the empire he had built. For Arabella, this lifelong whisper campaign was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was a constant, humbling reminder that no matter how high she climbed, her past and the circumstances of her ascent would always be subject to judgment and speculation. It was a vulnerability that could never be entirely erased, a crack in the magnificent facade she worked so hard to maintain. Yet, On the other hand, the rumor also served to firmly tether her son's identity and future to the source of his immense wealth and privilege. It explained the unbreakable bond between Archer and Collis and justified the extraordinary inheritance that would one day be his. The scandal, therefore, was not just a mark of shame. It was also the foundational narrative of her family's legitimacy within the Huntington Empire. A messy, human truth hidden beneath layers of Gilded Age propriety. The meticulously constructed world Arabella had built over decades came to a sudden and profound halt in the summer of 1900. Collis P. Huntington, the titan who had dominated railroads and reshaped a continent, was on a fishing trip in the Adirondacks when he fell ill. What seemed at first a minor ailment rapidly escalated into a severe case of intestinal gangrene. Within days, the man whose will had seemed as unshakable as the tracks he laid was gone, dying on August 13th at a camp on Raquette Lake. His death was not just a personal loss for Arabella. It was a seismic event in the American financial world, leaving a vacuum of power and a fortune of almost unimaginable size suddenly up for grabs. The quiet whispers and knowing glances of New York society were about to erupt into a full-blown storm, for everyone awaited the one document that would dictate the new order of things: Collis Huntington's last will and testament. The reading of that will was nothing short of a bombshell, a moment of pure, unadulterated shock that rippled from the private lawyers' offices out to the front pages of newspapers across the country. Against all convention and every expectation, Collis P. Huntington had left the overwhelming majority of his colossal estate, a fortune contemporary estimates pegged at around $40 million, a sum equivalent to well over $1.3 billion in today's money, not to distant relatives, not to charitable foundations bearing his name, but to Arabella Worsham, the woman the world still knew only as his longtime companion. This was an unprecedented act. In the Gilded Age, men of Huntington's stature typically bequeathed their wealth to blood relatives, to their lawful wives, or to institutions that would cement their public legacy. To leave such an empire to a mistress, no matter how devoted or capable, was a stunning affront to the established social order, a brazen and final declaration of his true loyalties that bypassed tradition entirely. The specifics of the bequest were as meticulous as they were revolutionary. Arabella was named the primary heir and executrix of the estate, granting her not just immense wealth, but also complete control over its administration. She inherited his magnificent 57th Street mansion in New York City, filled with the art and treasures they had curated together. More importantly, she gained control of his vast and complex investment portfolio: the railroad stocks, the steamship lines, the real estate holdings, and the industrial interests that formed the beating heart of his financial empire. This wasn't a simple inheritance of cash. It was the transfer of a dynamic, operating system of wealth generation. She wasn't just being given a fortune. She was being given the tools, the assets, and the authority to manage and grow it, a responsibility almost never entrusted to a woman of that era. Naturally, this extraordinary decision did not go unchallenged. Members of Huntington's extended family, who had likely expected significant bequests themselves, were outraged. They launched immediate legal challenges, contesting the will on the grounds of undue influence, arguing that Arabella had manipulated a frail and aging man in his final days to secure this monumental prize. These lawsuits plunged Arabella into a very public and deeply unseemly battle, the exact kind of scandal she had spent a lifetime expertly avoiding. Yet, she met this challenge with the same steely composure and strategic intelligence she had always displayed. She had not been a passive observer for 20 years. She understood the legal and financial intricacies of the estate better than anyone alive, save for Collis himself. One by one, the court challenges were defeated. The will and her position as its chief beneficiary were upheld, solidifying her status not as a grieving mistress, but as one of the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in the entire United States. This victory was about far more than money. It was the ultimate validation of her 3-decade partnership with Collis. The will was his final, resounding message to the world, a posthumous acknowledgement that Arabella had been his true partner in every sense of the word, his confidante, his business advisor, his emotional anchor, and the architect of his private life. He wasn't rewarding a mistress. He was entrusting his life's work to the person he deemed most capable of understanding and stewarding it. In that single, audacious legal document, Collis Huntington posthumously anointed Arabella not just as his heir, but as his equal, shattering the glass ceiling of Gilded Age patriarchy and granting her a level of financial autonomy and social power that was virtually unheard of for any woman, marking her dramatic and irrevocable transformation from a shadowy figure into an undisputed captain. Industry. Overnight, Arabella Worsham was transformed. The quiet, discreet companion vanished, and in her place stood Arabella Huntington, a widow in the eyes of the law and the undisputed mistress of a fortune so vast it was difficult to comprehend. With the legal challenges defeated, she was no longer a societal paradox. She was a fact. Her inheritance catapulted her into a stratum of wealth that few people, let alone women, had ever occupied. In an era where even the grandest female fortunes were typically managed by male trustees or husbands, Arabella's control was absolute and direct. She wasn't just rich. She was a primary shareholder in the engine of American industry, a boardroom power who held the reins to a sprawling network of assets that influenced the entire national economy. She had become, by nearly every account, the wealthiest woman in the United States. The sheer scale of her new dominion was breathtaking. Her portfolio was a mirror of America's Gilded Age expansion itself. She held massive blocks of stock in the Southern Pacific Railroad, a corporate behemoth that controlled transportation and commerce across the American West, dictating the economic fate of entire states. Her ownership extended to the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, a vital artery moving goods and people through the heart of the country. Beyond the rails, she commanded a fleet of steamships through the Pacific Mail Steamship Company, controlling crucial lanes of international trade to Asia and the West Coast. Her real estate holdings were not merely personal homes, though she had several of those, but vast tracts of income-generating land, commercial properties, and strategic investments in coal, timber, and other industrial concerns. This wasn't a static collection of valuables. It was a dynamic, living empire that required constant, savvy management to keep its immense power growing. Central to her new life was the magnificent Fifth Avenue mansion in New York, a physical symbol of her ascended status. This was not just a house, it was a palace, filled with the art and antiquities she and Collis had spent decades acquiring. But for Arabella, This world-class collection was more than a display of wealth. It was the foundation of her new identity as a patroness of the arts and a cultural leader. She understood that in America's elite circles, true power was not measured by money alone, but by taste, cultivation, and the ability to shape culture. Her home became a private museum, a salon where scholars, artists, and dealers gathered, not to pity a former mistress, but to seek the favor and insight of a formidable connoisseur. She was building a legacy that would transcend the railroad balance sheets, establishing herself as a central figure in the world of art and philanthropy. Perhaps most astonishing was her seamless transition into the role of business magnate. The years spent as Collis's secretary and confidante had been a masterclass in high finance, and she proved to be a brilliant and decisive student. Rather than retreating into the background and relying solely on male advisors, she took active personal command of her empire. She corresponded directly with railroad executives, analyzed investment reports, and made strategic decisions about buying, selling, and holding assets. She navigated the exclusively male world of finance with a cool competence that commanded respect, even from those who may have initially doubted her. She wasn't merely preserving Collis's fortune. She was growing it, applying her own sharp intellect to the empire she had helped build from the shadows, demonstrating that her value had always extended far beyond the domestic sphere. But to fully understand the astonishing turn Arabella's life was about to take, we must turn our attention to the other central figure in this drama, Henry Edwards Huntington. If Collis was the gruff, indomitable empire builder, his nephew Henry was the polished, strategic heir apparent, a man groomed for leadership, but with a vision all his own. Born in 1850, the same year as Arabella, Henry was the son of Collis's brother, Solon, and from a young age, he was brought into the family business, learning the intricacies of railroads not from a textbook, but from the ground up under his uncle's exacting, often difficult, tutelage. Their relationship was a complex mix of mentorship, familial duty, and fierce professional rivalry, a dynamic that would shape Henry's entire career and ultimately, his destiny. Henry's early career was a testament to both his own considerable abilities and the immense weight of his uncle's influence. He didn't start at the top. He began as a laborer on the Central Pacific, experiencing the brutal, physical reality of the enterprise that was generating the family's fortune. This hands-on experience was crucial, giving him a practical understanding that many Gilded Age heirs lacked. He quickly proved himself to be a natural, not just as an operations man, but as a shrewd negotiator and financier. By the 1880s, he had risen to become a top executive within the Southern Pacific system, Collis's sprawling West Coast railroad monopoly. He was instrumental in many of its key deals, including the complex and controversial acquisition of the iconic Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, a move that solidified the Huntington grip on transportation from coast to coast. Yet, working for a titan like Collis was never simple. While Henry was the obvious successor, his uncle was a notoriously controlling and demanding partner. Collis had built his empire through sheer force of will and was reluctant to fully cede control or share the spotlight. This led to frequent, and at times very public, clashes between the two strong-willed men. Henry often chafed under his uncle's micromanagement, yearning for the autonomy to pursue his own strategic ideas. Their disagreements weren't just personal, they were philosophical. Henry had a more forward-looking, some might say more diplomatic, approach to business, often advocating for expansion and modernization in ways that sometimes put him at odds with his uncle's more conservative, iron-fisted methods. This tension created a prolonged and awkward dance of power, with Henry always the heir, but never quite the king. Parallel to his demanding career, Henry had built what appeared to be a solid and respectable personal life. In 1870, he married Mary Alice Prentice, a socially prominent woman from San Francisco. Together, they had 4 children and established themselves as pillars of the Los Angeles community, where Henry was increasingly focusing his business interests. Their marriage from the outside seemed to embody the ideal Gilded Age partnership. He was the rising captain of industry, and she was the gracious society matron, managing their household and their social standing. They built a grand home in San Marino, which would later become the world-famous Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens. For decades, this was the public face of Henry E. Huntington, a devoted family man and a dedicated businessman, firmly entrenched in his role as the dutiful nephew and the presumed successor to one of America's greatest fortunes. He was, by all appearances, living the life that was expected of him, a life of obligation and accomplishment that seemed to be set in stone. The carefully constructed worlds of both Arabella and Henry were irrevocably shattered by Collis's death, plunging them into a shared ocean of grief and complex responsibility. For Arabella, the loss was profoundly personal. She had not only lost her partner of 3 decades, but also the architect of the life she had so painstakingly built. For Henry, the loss was equally monumental, a mix of genuine familial sorrow and the daunting reality of stepping out from the long shadow of his formidable uncle. They were now the 2 most powerful figures in the Huntington Empire, bound together by blood, by business, and by the immense, unspoken history that Arabella shared with the man who had been a father figure to Henry. In the months following the funeral, their relationship, once one of distant and polite acquaintance, began to transform under the weight of their shared circumstances, evolving from a necessary business alliance into something far deeper and more dangerous. Their initial meetings were undoubtedly practical, focused on the monumental task of untangling and managing the estate's vast holdings. They spent hours together in libraries and studies, surrounded by ledgers, legal documents, and maps of railroad lines. But in these intense, focused sessions, something unexpected happened. They discovered a powerful intellectual kinship. Arabella, long accustomed to being the sharpest mind in the room on matters of finance and strategy, found in Henry not a condescending nephew, but an equal, a man who understood the intricacies of their empire as innately as she did. Henry, for his part, discovered that the woman he had known only as his uncle's companion was a brilliant business tactician with a keen eye for investment and a deep understanding of art and culture that mirrored his own growing passions. The respect that formed in those meetings was the foundation upon which everything else would be built. This mutual professional admiration soon blossomed into a profound emotional connection. They were 2 people who had loved the same powerful, difficult man in different ways, and they were perhaps the only 2 people on Earth who truly understood the weight of his legacy and the complexities of his character. They could share memories and frustrations that could never be spoken of with anyone else. In each other, they found a safe harbor, a confidante who offered not just sympathy, but genuine comprehension. The shared grief that had initially brought them together slowly transformed into a shared hope for a future neither had anticipated. The dutiful nephew and the inherited widow, both trapped in roles defined by Collis Huntington, began to see a path to a life defined by their own desires. The social dynamic of their growing closeness was, from the very beginning, utterly explosive. Henry was still legally married to Mary Alice, though their marriage had become one of quiet estrangement, a partnership of convenience rather than passion, common among the elite, but never to be acknowledged publicly. Arabella was his uncle's widow, a woman whose very name was still synonymous with scandal in many circles. For them to be seen together too frequently, or with too much obvious affection, was to invite cataclysmic gossip. Their courtship, therefore, had to be conducted with the same meticulous discretion Arabella had perfected over a lifetime. Stolen glances at public events, private dinners arranged under the guise of business meetings, and correspondence that had to be carefully worded. Every moment of their growing love was shadowed by the terrifying risk of discovery. Yet the force of their attraction proved stronger than the fear of society's censure. They were not merely two lonely people finding comfort. They were two formidable intellects and kindred spirits recognizing their perfect match. Henry shared Arabella's burgeoning passion for art collection, and together they began to dream on a monumental scale, discussing the acquisition of entire libraries and collections of old masters, envisioning a cultural legacy that would far outlast their railroad fortunes. In each other, they found the partner they had always needed but never had, an equal in ambition, a companion in curiosity, and a true emotional counterpart. Their relationship was a fusion of heart and mind, a partnership that promised not just personal happiness, but the ability to build something greater together than either could ever have achieved alone, setting the stage for a decision that would shock the world and redefine the meaning of family, loyalty, and love in the Gilded Age. Henry Edwards Huntington's decision to file for divorce from his wife, Mary Alice, in 1906 was not an impulsive act of passion, but the calculated, final move in a long and quiet strategic game. By this time, their marriage of over 30 years had become little more than a legal formality, a hollow shell of the partnership it was once presumed to be. They lived largely separate lives. Henry was deeply engrossed in his rapidly expanding business ventures and burgeoning passion for book collecting in Los Angeles, while Mary Alice maintained her social commitments in their family home in San Francisco. The emotional distance between them had grown into a vast, unbridgeable chasm, making the legal dissolution almost an afterthought to a separation that had already taken place in every meaningful sense. For a man of Henry's stature, however, the act of formally ending a marriage was never a private family matter. It was a public event with the potential to scandalize society and damage a carefully cultivated reputation. The legal proceedings themselves were handled with a masterful degree of discretion, a testament to Henry's understanding of power and public perception. He and his lawyers meticulously crafted the petition to ensure it would be as uncontested and uneventful as possible. The grounds cited were the standard, vaguely defined, extreme cruelty, commonly used in that era, a legal placeholder that avoided the need to air any specific, salacious details of their private discord in open court. There were no dramatic accusations, no public battles over assets or children. Their 4 children were all adults by this point, which removed the most painful element of any Gilded Age divorce, a custody fight. Mary Alice, perhaps understanding the inevitability of the situation, or perhaps offered a settlement that ensured her comfort in silence, did not contest the action. The entire process was designed to be as quiet and bureaucratic as possible, a stark contrast to the emotional earthquake it represented. Despite these careful efforts, the divorce sent shockwaves through their social circles. In the early 20th century, divorce was still a profound social stain, particularly among the old money elite, who valued the appearance of stability above all else. It was an admission of failure, a public rupture in the facade of perfect domesticity that was so crucial to maintaining one's standing. For a man like Henry Huntington, a pillar of the business community and the heir to a national legacy, to willingly court such a scandal was almost unthinkable. Whispers and judgment were inevitable. Those in the know would have understood that a divorce of this magnitude, for a man of his age and position, was not undertaken lightly. It could only mean that something, or someone, of immense importance was waiting on the other side. The financial settlement, while private, was undoubtedly immense and reflected the vast fortune Henry now controlled. Mary Alice received a substantial portion of his wealth, ensuring she would remain one of the wealthiest women in California for the rest of her life. This was not just generosity. It was a strategic payoff, a necessary cost of doing business to secure her cooperation and prevent a far messier, more public legal battle that could have dragged on for years and tarnished the Huntington name. The clean, swift nature of the divorce was worth every penny. It granted Henry something that his railroad millions could not automatically buy: his personal freedom. With the decree finalized, the cord that had bound him to a life of obligation and expectation was officially cut. He was no longer just Collis Huntington's nephew or Mary Alice Huntington's husband. He was, for the first time, a man entirely his own, answerable only to his own ambitions and his own heart. The news broke not with a whisper, but with a thunderclap of pure, unadulterated scandal. When the society columns of New York's most powerful newspapers announced the engagement of Henry E. Huntington to his late uncle's widow in the summer of 1913, it was as if a bomb had been dropped directly into the heart of Gilded Age propriety. This was not a quiet piece of gossip to be shared behind fluttering fans. It was a frontal assault on the very foundations of society's most sacred rules, and the reaction was one of collective, horrified fascination. Headlines did not merely report the news. They framed it as a shocking transgression, their ink seeming to drip with moral outrage and salacious glee. The story had everything: unimaginable wealth, a twisted family tree, and a romance that seemed to defy not just convention, but basic decency in the eyes of the world. In the opulent ballrooms of Fifth Avenue and the sprawling cottages of Newport, the topic was utterly inescapable, the sole subject of conversation at every dinner party and afternoon tea. The sheer audacity of the union was what left everyone breathless. Arabella was not just marrying her late husband's relative. She was marrying a man who was, for all intents and purposes, her own nephew by marriage. In the tightly coded world of the elite, this wasn't just unconventional. It felt dangerously close to incestuous, a grotesque blurring of familial lines that struck at the core of their structured existence. Whispers of aunt and nephew flew through gilded drawing rooms, each utterance laced with a potent mixture of condemnation and intense curiosity. For the matrons who ruled society, women like Caroline Astor and Alva Vanderbilt, this was the ultimate breach of contract. Arabella, the woman they had reluctantly tolerated for decades as Collis's mistress, had now committed an unforgivable sin, wielding her hard-won respectability like a weapon to destroy the very rules that had finally granted it to her. The criticism was deeply gendered and viciously personal. Arabella bore the brunt of the venom, cast not as a romantic heroine, but as a calculating succubus. Critics painted her as the archetypal wicked stepmother, a woman of insatiable ambition who had first ensnared an old man for his fortune, and then, not content with her staggering wealth, had set her sights on his younger, more vigorous nephew to satisfy some unquenchable thirst for both power and passion. She was accused of breaking up a respectable marriage, conveniently ignoring the long-standing estrangement between Henry and Mary Alice, and of manipulating a vulnerable man in his grief. Henry, while not spared from judgment, was often portrayed as a bewitched fool, a man led astray by a dangerously attractive and cunning older woman who knew exactly how to exploit a family connection for her own gain. The narrative was less about their genuine connection and far more about a Shakespearean drama of betrayal and moral decay. Beneath the surface level gossip about family ties, however, simmered a much deeper and more uncomfortable anxiety about the nature of wealth and class itself. Arabella's entire life story was a threat. She was living proof that the barriers of class were not impenetrable, that a woman of humble origins could not only enter the inner sanctum, but could conquer it completely. Her marriage to Henry was the final, triumphant move in this conquest, and it laid bare the silent fear of every old money aristocrat, that bloodlines and breeding could be overthrown by sheer intelligence, ambition, and nerve. She had played their game, mastered their rules, and then, at the moment of her ultimate victory, she had changed the game entirely, choosing personal happiness over social approval in the most spectacular way possible. Her scandal was so profound because it was more than just a romantic affair. It was a radical act that challenged the very hierarchy that had made the Gilded Age elite feel secure in their superiority. On a warm July day in 1913, at the peak of a New York summer, Arabella Huntington and Henry Edwards Huntington arrived at the Manhattan Marriage Bureau, accompanied only by a single friend to serve as their witness. There was no grand procession, no gathering of the social elite, no orchestra playing in a flower-filled ballroom. Instead, they exchanged their vows in the simplest, most businesslike of ceremonies, a quiet legal formality that stood in stark, almost defiant contrast to the hurricane of gossip and judgment raging just outside the courthouse doors. After decades of living in the spotlight, Arabella as the most talked about mistress in America, Henry as the dutiful nephew and scion, they chose to claim this moment for themselves alone, shutting out the noise of the world to make a commitment based not on social performance, but on profound personal conviction. The guest list for this most scandalous of society weddings was notable for who was not there. There were no Vanderbilts or Astors, no railroad barons or financial titans, no representatives from the innermost circles of the 400. The absence of these pillars of high society was a silent, powerful testament to the price they were paying for their love. They had been effectively excommunicated from the world they had both worked a lifetime to join, and their wedding day was a quiet acknowledgement of that reality. By foregoing any attempt at a large celebration, they were making a clear statement. Their union did not require, nor did it seek, the approval of a community that had already condemned them. This day was not for public consumption. It was a private covenant between two people who had found their true home in one another after half a lifetime spent playing roles for everyone else. This conscious retreat into privacy was a masterstroke of image control from a woman who had spent her entire life mastering it. Arabella understood the optics of the situation better than anyone. A large, lavish wedding would have been seen as a grotesque spectacle, a brazen flaunting of their transgression in the face of polite society. It would have fueled the newspaper headlines for weeks. A small, sober, almost austere ceremony, however, reframed the narrative. It presented their marriage not as a wild, passionate fling, but as a serious, thoughtful, and dignified partnership. It communicated that this was not an act of rebellion for its own sake, but a deliberate and deeply considered choice made by two mature adults who were answerable only to their own hearts and consciences. For Henry, this quiet ceremony was the final step in his long journey out from under the shadow of his formidable uncle. He was not marrying Arabella as Collis Huntington's nephew. He was marrying her as Henry E. Huntington, his own man, making his own choice for his own future. The lack of fanfare underscored that this was a personal decision, separate from the Huntington business empire and its accompanying social obligations. It was a declaration of independence, a signal that from this day forward, his primary allegiance was to the partnership he was forming with Arabella, a partnership that would define the second and most fulfilling act of his life. Immediately following the brief legal ceremony, the newlyweds did not host a reception. They simply left. They retreated into the sanctuary of their private world, likely to the magnificent Fifth Avenue mansion that had been Collis's and was now wholly theirs, a palace that contained both the artifacts of their shared past and the blank canvas of their future together. In doing so, they turned the greatest scandal of the Gilded Age into something strangely intimate and unassailable. The press and the public were left with nothing to see, no spectacle to dissect, no juicy details to report beyond the bare legal fact of the marriage itself. By refusing to perform their happiness for others, they protected it, creating a private fortress around their relationship that would endure for the rest of their lives. The quietness of their wedding was not a sign of shame. It was the ultimate evidence of their strength and the profound seriousness of their commitment. Their union was the most talked about romance of the era, but to view it solely through the lens of the heart is to miss its true, earth-shaking significance. In the cold, hard calculus of Gilded Age capitalism, the marriage of Arabella and Henry Huntington was nothing less than a corporate merger of historic proportions, a strategic consolidation of assets that would have made Collis himself nod with grim approval. For decades, the sprawling Huntington fortune had existed in two separate, powerful streams, one controlled by Arabella from her base in New York, and the other managed by Henry from his growing stronghold in Southern California. Their wedding did not just join two people. It reunited a fractured financial empire, channeling those two mighty streams into a single, unstoppable river of capital, influence, and ambition. This was a partnership designed for dominion, and together, they would set about building a legacy that would permanently alter the landscape of an entire region. The genius of their combined strategy lay in its focus. While other tycoons of their stature were still looking east, the Huntingtons saw the future unfolding under the California sun. Henry had already begun pivoting his investments toward Los Angeles, recognizing its explosive potential long before it became the sprawling metropolis we know today. With Arabella's vast resources now fully integrated with his own, they possessed an unparalleled war chest to execute a vision that was both breathtakingly simple and incredibly complex. They wouldn't just invest in Southern California. They would actively build it, shape it, and ultimately own a foundational piece of its infrastructure. Their plan was a masterclass in vertical integration, not for a single industry, but for an entire geographic region. They moved beyond simply owning land. They sought to control every essential service that would make that land valuable and functional for the millions of people who would soon call it home. Their most transformative vehicle for this ambition was the Pacific Electric Railway, the famous red car system. Under Henry's direction and with their combined capital, this network exploded into the largest electric railway system in the world, with over 1,000 miles of track knitting together dozens of growing communities across Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. This was far more than a public transit project. It was the engine of their real estate empire. The red cars didn't just move people. They created value, connecting remote, inexpensive tracts of land to the urban core and making them instantly desirable for development. The Huntingtons would quietly acquire huge parcels of rural land, then extend the railway lines directly to them, dramatically increasing the property's value almost overnight. They were quite literally laying the tracks for their own profits, building the pathways that would guide an entire city's growth according to their own blueprint. But their vision extended far beyond the tracks. Understanding that transportation alone wasn't enough, they used their combined fortune to acquire controlling interests in the very utilities that would power this new civilization. They took a dominant stake in the Los Angeles Railway, which provided the vital local streetcar service within the city itself. They moved into power generation, grasping that electricity was the lifeblood of the modern age. Most significantly, they gained control of the Southern California Gas Company, which held a monopoly on providing natural gas for heating and cooking to the entire basin. This was the final, brilliant piece of their strategy. They owned the land, they owned the transportation to get to the land, and they owned the utilities that would make life on that land possible and comfortable. From the moment a person stepped onto a Pacific Electric car to commute home, to flipping a light switch or cooking dinner, they were likely contributing to the Huntington fortune. Their integrated empire touched nearly every aspect of daily life in the rapidly growing region. This coordinated effort required a seamless partnership. Arabella was far from a silent investor. Her decades of experience managing Collis's complex portfolio made her an active and invaluable partner in these ventures. She provided not just capital, but also shrewd counsel, her sharp financial mind perfectly complementing Henry's operational genius and local knowledge. Together, they made decisions with a unity of purpose that was rare in business, let alone in marriage. They deployed their assets with a coordination that left competitors struggling to keep pace, able to move quickly and decisively on opportunities that required immense capital outlays. Their marriage had effectively created a new kind of corporate entity, a family-run conglomerate with the flexibility of a partnership and the financial power of a major corporation, all dedicated to a single, grand geographical vision. They weren't just playing the game of real estate. They had rewritten the rules entirely, demonstrating a level of foresight and coordination that would cement their status not just as wealthy individuals, but as the true architects of modern Southern California. While their business ventures were reshaping the physical landscape of Southern California, Arabella and Henry Huntington were simultaneously embarking on a far more personal and enduring mission: the creation of a cultural legacy that would stand for centuries. This shared passion found its ultimate expression at Henry's San Marino Ranch, a sprawling property of over 500 acres that they envisioned not as a mere country estate, but as a center for scholarship, beauty, and public enlightenment. Their dream was to build something truly monumental, a gift to the world that would transcend their railroad fortunes and the scandals that had once defined them. This was not a project of ego, but one of profound belief in the transformative power of art, literature, and nature. They were no longer just collectors. They were architects of a new American institution, and their collaboration would birth one of the most magnificent cultural treasures in the world: the Huntington Library, art collections, and Botanical Gardens. The heart of this grand endeavor was, without question, the library. Henry's passion for book collecting had begun years earlier, but with Arabella's full partnership and financial backing, it evolved into a focused, relentless pursuit of the most important texts in the history of the English-speaking world. They were not merely acquiring books. They were assembling the foundational documents of Western civilization. Their combined resources and shared determination allowed them to secure unprecedented treasures, often outbidding entire national libraries and universities for the most coveted items. Their most legendary acquisition was the Ellesmere Chaucer, a pristine manuscript of the Canterbury Tales from the early 1400s, considered one of the most important literary manuscripts in existence. But that was just the beginning. They brought to San Marino a Gutenberg Bible on vellum, one of the finest copies in the world, alongside the original manuscript of Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, a massive collection of the early editions of Shakespeare's works, and thousands of letters and documents from some of America's most pivotal figures, including George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Each new acquisition was a strategic piece in a grand mosaic, building a research library of such depth and quality that it would forever attract the world's foremost scholars. Arabella's particular genius shone most brilliantly in the formation of the art collections. While Henry focused on books and manuscripts, she took the lead in expanding their holdings of European art, drawing upon the expertise she had honed over a lifetime. Her ambition was to create a collection that told the story of Western art in the most vivid and masterful terms possible. She spearheaded the acquisition of some of the most iconic British portraits ever painted, including Thomas Gainsborough's The Blue Boy and Thomas Lawrence's Pinky. The purchase of The Blue Boy was a cultural event in itself, a moment of national mourning in England when the painting was sold and shipped to California, symbolizing a seismic shift in the art world where American collectors could now claim Europe's greatest masterpieces. Arabella didn't stop there. She filled the galleries with stunning works by Joshua Reynolds, Anthony van Dyck, and an unparalleled collection of 18th century French furniture, tapestries, and decorative arts that transformed the Huntington Art Galleries into an immersive experience of European elegance and craftsmanship. Her eye for quality was uncompromising, and every piece she acquired was a testament to her sophisticated taste and her desire to bring the very best of the old world to their new California home. The third and equally vital pillar of their vision was the landscape itself. The arid San Marino Ranch was transformed into a series of breathtaking botanical gardens, a living work of art that reflected their shared love for nature's diversity and beauty. This was not a simple matter of planting flowers. It was a massive undertaking of landscape architecture and horticultural science. They commissioned the design of over a dozen specialized gardens, each with its own distinct character and ecosystem. The Japanese garden, with its historic moon bridge, serene koi ponds, and authentic ceremonial tea house, offered a place of quiet contemplation. The desert garden, one of the largest and most important collections of cacti and succulents in the world, showcased the strange and beautiful resilience of arid climate plants. The Rose Garden, the Shakespeare Garden, the Jungle Garden, each was a meticulously planned environment, a testament to their belief that beauty could be cultivated in many forms. They imported mature trees from across the globe, designed intricate irrigation systems, and employed a small army of gardeners, all to create an outdoor museum that was every bit as curated and intentional as the galleries indoors. What makes the Huntingtons so extraordinary is how perfectly it embodies the synergy of their partnership. It was not Henry's project or Arabella's. It was a true fusion of their individual passions into a single, cohesive vision. The library reflects Henry's intellectual curiosity and his desire to preserve the written word. The art collection bears the indelible mark of Arabella's impeccable taste and her lifelong study of European culture. The gardens represent their shared love for beauty and their desire to create a place of public enjoyment and peace. They walk the grounds together, planning where a new garden path should go or debating which masterpiece should hang in a particular room. They were building their legacy brick by brick, book by book, and painting by painting, creating a monument not to their wealth, but to their belief that art, knowledge, and nature were essential to the human spirit. In doing so, they transformed a private ambition into a public trust, ensuring that long after the gossip about their marriage had faded into history, their greatest collaborative achievement would continue to inspire and educate millions. Arabella Huntington's mastery of the art world was a pursuit that went far beyond mere acquisition. It was an expression of her deepest self, a carefully curated performance of taste, intellect, and power that allowed her to finally claim the legitimacy society had so long withheld. For a woman who had spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of Gilded Age society, building a world-class art collection was the ultimate act of self-definition. It was a way to translate her immense financial power into something that could not be questioned or gossiped about, a cultural authority. In the hushed, hallowed halls of museums and the exclusive galleries of European dealers, her past as a railroad magnate's mistress was irrelevant. What mattered was her eye, her knowledge, and the weight of her purse. She became a student of beauty, a patroness of history, and in doing so, she constructed a new identity that was both bulletproof and breathtaking. Her specific tastes were a reflection of the world she wished to inhabit and be associated with. She was not drawn to the radical, emerging modernism of her time. Instead, she looked to the established, time-honored grandeur of European tradition. She developed a particular passion for old master paintings, especially the luminous portraiture of 18th century Britain. These works by artists like Thomas Gainsborough, Sir Joshua Reynolds, and George Romney depicted an aristocratic world of effortless elegance and refined grace, a world of inherited status and unshakable confidence that was the complete antithesis of her own hard-won position. By surrounding herself with these images of blue-blooded nobility, she was, in a sense, acquiring the lineage she lacked, building a family tree of masterpieces whose historical weight could rival any Mayflower pedigree. Alongside these iconic portraits, she cultivated a second, equally significant passion for French decorative arts of the same period. This was not a casual interest. It was a deep, scholarly pursuit. She amassed an extraordinary collection of 18th century French furniture, much of it made by the legendary ébénistes who served the court of Louis XVI. She acquired exquisite Savonnerie carpets, delicate Sèvres porcelain, and shimmering gilt bronze-mounted objects. This focus on the decorative was profoundly insightful. While paintings declared status on a wall, these objects transformed an entire environment. They spoke to a holistic understanding of luxury, one that encompassed every aspect of daily life, from the chair one sat in to the vase on the mantel. It demonstrated a connoisseurship that was both intimate and immense, an appreciation for the total art of living well. To build a collection of this caliber, Arabella needed a guide through the complex and often cutthroat international art market, and she found her perfect, if sometimes contentious, partner in the legendary dealer Joseph Duveen. Their relationship was one of the most fascinating and productive in art history. A high-stakes dance between a determined, knowledgeable client and a supremely shrewd merchant who understood the desires of America's new aristocracy better than anyone. Duveen, later Lord Duveen, was a master of psychology and theater. He didn't just sell art. He sold an entire fantasy of cultured supremacy, and he recognized in Arabella a client whose ambitions were limitless and whose taste was impeccable. He famously catered to what he called the aspirational nature of American collectors, offering them not just objects, but ready-made legacies. Their correspondence reveals a relationship built on mutual respect, but also on a constant negotiation of power. Arabella was no passive buyer. She was an exacting client who studied catalogs, knew the market prices, and was not afraid to challenge Duveen's often exorbitant offers. She would question attributions, debate condition reports, and sometimes walk away from a deal if she felt the price did not reflect the value. Duveen, for his part, respected her expertise and her resolve. He knew that placing a masterpiece with Arabella Huntington was not just a sale. It was an investment in his own reputation. A painting in her collection gained immediate prestige, setting a new benchmark for quality that would inflate the value of every other work he had to offer. He would often secure incredible treasures for her, sometimes even orchestrating entire sales to ensure she had first refusal, understanding that her acquisitions were a cornerstone of his business strategy. The sheer scale and quality of what she assembled, often through Duveen, remains staggering. Her most legendary coup, orchestrated by Duveen, was the acquisition of Thomas Gainsborough's The Blue Boy from the Duke of Westminster in 1921. The purchase was a transatlantic sensation. In England, it was viewed as a national tragedy. Newspapers ran mournful headlines, and crowds flocked to the National Gallery for a last look before it was crated and shipped to America. For the British, it symbolized the end of an era, a recognition that their cultural patrimony was now being bought by the boundless wealth of the New World. For Arabella, it was the ultimate trophy, a public declaration that her collection could rival that of any national museum. But the Blue Boy was just the most famous piece in a constellation of masterworks. She acquired Lawrence's Pinky, Reynolds's Mrs., Siddons as the Tragic Muse, and magnificent examples by Rembrandt and Van Dyck, creating a private gallery that was, in essence, a distilled history of European art. Her method of collecting was intensely personal and immersive. She did not simply have paintings hung on walls. She lived with them, studied them, and integrated them into her daily life. Her New York mansion on Fifth Avenue, and later her home on 57th Street, were not just houses with art in them. They were environments meticulously designed as a backdrop for the collection. The lighting, the placement of furniture, the color of the walls, every detail was considered to enhance the viewer's experience of each painting and object. She would often rearrange her galleries, spending hours contemplating the dialogue between different works, creating new visual conversations and relationships. This deep, lived engagement with her collection is what elevated her from a mere buyer to a true connoisseur. She understood that a great collection was more than a sum of its parts. It was a narrative, a carefully composed story about beauty, history, and human achievement that she herself was authoring, page by glorious page. This profound commitment to building a public legacy went far beyond the walls of their San Marino estate, extending into a wide-ranging campaign of philanthropy that fundamentally shaped American cultural and intellectual life. For Arabella and Henry, their immense wealth was not an end in itself, but a tool for stewardship, a means to nourish the minds and uplift the spirit of the public for generations to come. They understood that true legacy was not measured in dollars, but in the enduring institutions that would continue to educate and inspire long after they were gone. Their giving was strategic, visionary, and deeply personal, reflecting their shared belief that access to beauty and knowledge was not a luxury for the elite, but a vital nutrient for a healthy democracy. This wasn't charity in the traditional sense. It was nation-building of a cultural kind, an investment in the very soul of America. Arabella's role in this philanthropic partnership was particularly transformative. She evolved decisively from a private collector into a public patron on a grand scale, using her financial power and her hard-won cultural authority to become one of the most significant benefactors the American art world had ever seen. Her most monumental act of public giving was her pivotal support for the construction of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. She provided a staggering $1 million towards the building of its majestic new neoclassical home on Huntington Avenue, a sum so vast it essentially guaranteed the project's completion and secured the museum's future as a leading institution. This was not an anonymous donation. It was a bold declaration of her status as a cultural force. In recognition, the museum's central courtyard was named in her honor, permanently enshrining her role as a foundational pillar of one of America's great civic treasures. She did not just write a check. She helped erect a temple to art for the public. Her influence extended powerfully into the world of education and research as well. She became a major donor to both Harvard and Yale universities, providing crucial funds that supported art historical research, acquisitions for their libraries, and the professional development of scholars. This support demonstrated a nuanced understanding that a vibrant cultural ecosystem required more than just objects. It needed the curators, historians, and conservators who could study, interpret, and preserve them. She also provided essential funding for the American Academy in Rome, an institution dedicated to fostering American artistic and scholarly work in the historic heart of European culture. In doing so, she was investing in the next generation of American talent, ensuring that future artists and architects would have the opportunity to be steeped in the classical traditions she so admired, thereby enriching the cultural landscape back home. Perhaps the most touching and personal of her philanthropic endeavors was her dedication to the people of her adopted hometown, Newport, Rhode Island. There, she funded the construction of a beautiful public library, a project that spoke directly to her belief in self-improvement and the democratization of knowledge. For a woman who had educated herself out of poverty through observation and access, providing a free library was a way of offering that same ladder to others. She also donated the land for and funded the construction of the Newport Hospital, demonstrating a holistic sense of civic duty that addressed both the intellectual and physical well-being of a community. These local gifts, away from the glittering art capitals of the world, revealed the authentic core of her philanthropy, a genuine desire to create opportunity and alleviate suffering, rooted in her own lived experience of scarcity and her hard-won understanding of what truly built a community. Meanwhile, Henry's parallel philanthropic journey was equally impactful, though it often centered on the institutions he was most directly shaping in California. His vision for the Huntington Library, art collections, and Botanical Gardens was philanthropic from its inception. He didn't just will his collections to the public upon his death. He and Arabella began planning for the transition to a public institution while they were still very much alive, meticulously structuring the endowment and the legal framework to ensure its perpetual operation. In 1919, he formally deeded the entire San Marino property and its collections to a nonprofit educational trust, endowing it with the financial resources to operate in perpetuity as a gift to the people of California and the world. This was philanthropy on a breathtaking scale, the donation of an entire world they had built together, complete with the funding to sustain it. The true brilliance of their philanthropic model, however, lay in its integrated design. The Huntington was never conceived as a static repository for dead objects. From the beginning, it was engineered as a dynamic center for doing, for research, for learning, for public enjoyment. Henry established a robust fellowships program, inviting scholars from around the globe to live on the grounds and conduct primary research using the library's unparalleled resources. This transformed the institution from a museum into a laboratory for the humanities, ensuring that the books and manuscripts would not simply be admired behind glass, but would be actively used to generate new knowledge. The art galleries and botanical gardens were designed not for private contemplation, but for public edification and delight, with free admission days to ensure access for all. This holistic approach, combining world-class collections with dedicated funding for research and public access, created a new gold standard for American cultural philanthropy, a living, breathing institution that continues to fulfill their shared vision every single day. Together, Arabella and Henry Huntington redefined what it meant to be a patron in America. They moved beyond the model of the solitary collector who bequeaths a trove upon death, and instead became active, engaged architects of the cultural infrastructure itself. Their philanthropy was a powerful and very public answer to the scandals that had once defined them. Through these acts of immense generosity, they effectively translated the vast wealth generated by railroads and land deals into a lasting language of beauty, knowledge, and public service. They demonstrated that the greatest power of a fortune was not in its possession, but in its thoughtful and transformative dispersal, ensuring that their most enduring legacy would not be a newspaper headline about a forbidden love, but the quiet rustle of turning pages in a library, the hushed awe before a masterpiece, and the peaceful stroll through a garden. Gifts they gave to the world. Forever, their lives unfolded as a grand tour between two coastal capitals of American power, each home a stage for a different facet of their immense influence. In New York City, their primary residence was a statement of unparalleled grandeur, the colossal Huntington Mansion at 2 East 57th Street, directly opposite the Vanderbilt's own Chateau. This was not merely a large house. It was a Beaux Arts palace, the largest private home in the entire city, a fortress of limestone and opulence that dominated the corner of Fifth Avenue. Its sheer scale was a deliberate declaration of their arrival and their permanence at the very apex of society, a society that had once shunned them. Within its walls, Arabella's legendary art collection was displayed not as a private hobby, but as a public gallery of masterpieces, with Gainsborough's The Blue Boy and Lawrence's Pinky holding court in rooms filled with French antique furniture and rare tapestries. This was their Eastern Command Center, a place for conducting the business of high finance and even higher culture, where the air was thick with the weight of old-world elegance and the serious work of managing a transcontinental empire. When the relentless pace of New York began to feel confining, they would retreat to the sun-drenched serenity of their San Marino ranch in California, a 1,000-acre oasis that represented not just a change of scenery, but a completely different vision of paradise. Here, the formality of Fifth Avenue gave way to a more expansive, almost visionary way of life. The ranch was not simply a country estate. It was a living laboratory for their greatest shared passion. While the core of the future Huntington Library was already taking shape, the grounds themselves were an ongoing project of breathtaking ambition. They would walk together through the evolving landscape, planning the intricate pathways of the Japanese garden, selecting rare specimens for the burgeoning desert garden, and overseeing the design of what would become one of the world's finest botanical collections. Life in California was more relaxed, but no less purposeful, centered on the active cultivation of beauty and knowledge, a stark and intentional contrast to the performative social rigors of the East Coast. Regardless of the coast, their social calendar was a whirlwind of meticulously orchestrated spectacle. An invitation to a Huntington gathering was the most coveted ticket in America, a passport into the inner sanctum of unimaginable wealth and taste. Their dinners in the New York mansion were legendary affairs, served on Sevres porcelain beneath the gaze of Rembrandts and Van Dycks. The guest lists were a curated who's who of global power. Leading industrialists like Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick would debate economics with senators and Supreme Court justices, while world-renowned opera singers like Enrico Caruso might be persuaded to perform a private aria after dessert. The conversation was as rich as the surroundings, flowing from discussions of railroad expansion and international trade to passionate debates about the attribution of an Italian master or the merits of a newly discovered manuscript. Arabella, once an outsider, was now the undisputed queen of this realm, presiding over the table with a quiet authority that commanded respect from every titan in the room. Their entertaining was a masterclass in soft power, a tool they wielded with precision. A weekend house party at San Marino wasn't just a social event, it was a strategic gathering. They might host the governor of California to discuss legislation favorable to their railways, or entertain a delegation of British academics to facilitate the acquisition of a priceless literary treasure. Every detail, from the placement of a guest at the dinner table to the selection of wines from their private cellars, was carefully considered to achieve a specific effect, whether it was securing a business deal, winning over a critic, or simply reinforcing their status as the most cultured hosts on the continent. They understood that in the Gilded Age, business was not confined to the boardroom. It was conducted in the drawing room, over a perfectly cooked meal, and surrounded by objects of unimaginable beauty that silently testified to their power and discernment. In this rarefied world, they were treated with the reverence afforded to royalty. The press referred to Henry as the railroad king of the West, and Arabella was his consort, the Queen of Fifth Avenue. They traveled in private railway cars fitted with mahogany and silk, their journeys across the continent a seamless extension of their domestic luxury. When they arrived at a station, a personal retinue of secretaries, maids, and valets would descend first, ensuring every transition was flawless. Society pages chronicled their every public movement, from their attendance at the opera to their donations to charity, their past scandals now overshadowed by their present-day magnificence. They had achieved the ultimate Gilded Age paradox. They were the establishment, the very benchmark of taste and success against which all others were measured. Yet they had gotten there by breaking every single rule. Their dual existence between coasts was a perfect metaphor for their reign. Masters of the traditional East and architects of the modern West, forever bridging two worlds and ruling both. The partnership that had reshaped California and redefined American collecting came to an end on May 23, 1927, when Henry Edwards Huntington died at the age of 77 at their Philadelphia street home in San Marino. His death was not the shocking, sudden event that Collis's had been. Henry had been in declining health for some time, allowing for a period of quiet reflection and, crucially, careful estate planning. Yet its impact was no less profound. America lost one of its last great railroad titans, a man who had literally laid the tracks for Southern California's explosive growth. For Arabella, it was the loss of her beloved husband, her intellectual equal, and her business partner in the most ambitious ventures of her life. Just as she had nearly 3 decades earlier, she found herself once again the grieving widow of a Huntington giant, the executor of an empire, and the subject of intense public speculation about what would happen next to one of the nation's greatest fortunes. All eyes turned once more to the reading of a will, and for the second time in her life, Arabella Huntington was at the absolute center of a document that would dictate the future of a colossal legacy. Henry's last will and testament, however, contained none of the shocking controversy of his uncle's. Instead, it was a powerful and unambiguous affirmation of the profound trust and unity that had defined his marriage to Arabella. In a move that surprised no one who understood their relationship, yet still astonished onlookers with its sheer scale, Henry left his entire estate to Arabella for her lifetime. This was not a conditional bequest or a share of the assets. It was the entirety of his fortune, placed unconditionally in her hands. He named her the sole executrix and trustee, granting her complete and total control over every aspect of their combined empire: the vast railroad and utility stocks, the real estate holdings spanning the continent, the still growing art and library collections at San Marino, and the millions in liquid capital. This staggering inheritance, coming on top of the fortune she had already inherited from Collis, catapulted Arabella to a level of financial power that was virtually unimaginable for any individual, let alone a woman of her time. She was now the undisputed steward of the entire Huntington dynasty, a consolidated fortune that represented the combined vision and life work of 2 of America's most formidable industrialists. More importantly, Henry's will was his final, resounding vote of confidence in her capabilities. It was a declaration that he viewed her not merely as his wife, but as his rightful successor, the person most qualified to protect and advance the grand cultural and philanthropic projects they had dreamed up together. He was entrusting the fate of the Huntington Library, the art collections, and all their charitable endeavors to her discerning judgment alone, ensuring that their shared vision would continue to unfold exactly as they had planned it, without interference or compromise. The responsibility that now rested on her shoulders was immense. She was the sole director of a conglomerate that influenced the daily lives of millions through its utilities and transportation networks. She was the primary guardian of a cultural treasure house that was still very much a work in progress, with buildings to complete, gardens to cultivate, and acquisitions to be made. And she was the final arbiter of the Huntington name, a name that now signified not just ruthless business acumen, but a profound commitment to public good. Where others might have retreated from such overwhelming duty, Arabella embraced it with the same strategic intelligence and unflappable composure that had carried her through every previous challenge. She had not spent a lifetime studying the mechanics of power to falter now. She saw Henry's bequest not as a burden, but as the ultimate mandate to finish what they had started, to cement their legacy as the greatest cultural benefactors of their age. Her first and most sacred duty was to their masterpiece, the Huntington. Henry's will had explicitly laid out his wish for the institution to be endowed and open to the public after Arabella's own passing, but she had no intention of simply preserving it in a state of suspended animation. She became its active and deeply involved steward, overseeing the day-to-day operations, approving new acquisitions for the library and art collections, and guiding the continued expansion of the Botanical Gardens. She worked closely with the trustees and the director, ensuring that every decision aligned with the precise vision she and Henry had painstakingly developed during their long walks through the grounds. She was determined that when the doors finally opened to the world, it would be a perfect realization of their dream, a fully formed gift to humanity that bore the indelible mark of both their passions. In the quiet years following Henry's death, Arabella Huntington, now in her 70s, was not slowing down. She was diligently, lovingly, and with immense purpose, putting the final touches on a monument that would stand forever. Even into her 8th decade, Arabella Huntington's grip on the reins of her vast empire remained firm and decisive. The years following Henry's death were not a period of quiet retirement, but an intense chapter of consolidation and meticulous legacy building. She divided her time between the grand, art-filled silence of the New York mansion and the sun-drenched, growing oasis of San Marino, shuttling between the two coasts in her private railway car as she personally oversaw every facet of the fortune. Her days were filled with the same rigor that had always defined her. Mornings spent reviewing correspondence from railroad executives and stockbrokers. Afternoons in consultation with the directors of the nascent Huntington Institution, and evenings often dedicated to studying auction catalogs from dealers like Duveen, always seeking that one final, perfect masterpiece to add to the collection. She understood that her time was the final variable in a long equation, and she was determined to solve it perfectly, ensuring that the world she and Henry had built would not only endure but flourish. Her management style in these final years was a masterclass in strategic foresight. Recognizing that the sprawling business empire required a steady, professional hand for the long term, she began the careful process of transitioning its management. She did not sell off the core assets, the railroad and utility stocks that formed the financial bedrock of everything. Instead, she placed these holdings into a series of intricately structured trusts, managed by a board of trustees she personally selected for their financial acumen and unwavering loyalty to the Huntington vision. This ensured that the income stream funding the library's operations and future acquisitions would be protected and grown by experts, shielded from the potential mismanagement of a single heir or the volatility of future markets. She was, in effect, creating a perpetual motion machine for wealth generation, with its sole purpose being the funding of culture and education. At the very heart of her planning was the San Marino property itself. This was no longer just a private ranch. It was an institution in waiting, and Arabella treated it with the precision of a general preparing for a long campaign. She worked tirelessly with lawyers to draft and refine the trust documents that would govern the Huntington after her death. These were not simple boilerplate legal forms. They were deeply philosophical documents, embedding her and Henry's specific wishes into the very DNA of the organization. The trust stipulated everything from the number of research fellows to be hosted each year and the requirement for free public admission days, to the directive that the art collection must never be broken up or sold. She was encoding their values into law, creating a constitution for beauty and scholarship that would withstand any future trend or temptation. Perhaps her most poignant and personal contributions in these years were the final additions she made to the collections. Each new acquisition felt like a deliberate punctuation mark on a lifelong sentence. She continued to acquire major works of art, but now with an even sharper eye toward filling gaps and strengthening the narratives within the collection. She also turned her attention back to her first love, the French decorative arts, making significant purchases of 18th century furniture and objects that would complete the period rooms she envisioned. Every piece was chosen not for private enjoyment, but for its ultimate public audience. She would walk through the half-finished galleries, imagining where a new console table would stand or how light would fall on a newly acquired painting, curating the experience of future visitors with the same meticulous care she had once used to arrange dinners for titans of industry. Arabella's health began a gradual decline, but her mind remained as sharp and focused as ever. Even as her physical world narrowed, her vision for the future expanded. She spent hours reviewing architectural plans for new library wings and garden expansions, approving the designs that would shape the institution for the next century. Her final act of profound significance was the establishment of the Monumental Endowment Fund. She calculated the precise sum required to maintain the buildings, pay the staff, fund acquisitions, and support research in perpetuity. And then she willed that exact amount, plus a sizable buffer, to the trust. This was the final, crucial keystone in the arch of her legacy. It guaranteed that the Huntington would never become a burden on public funds or be forced to compromise its mission. It would be forever self-sustaining, forever independent, and forever free to pursue the lofty goals its founders had set. She passed away on September 16, 1924, in her New York home, surrounded by the masterpieces she had spent a lifetime gathering. Her death marked the end of an astonishing personal journey, from poverty in Richmond to becoming perhaps the wealthiest woman in the world, a figure of relentless ambition, profound love, and ultimate cultural triumph. But it also marked a beginning. With her passing, the intricate legal and financial machinery she had so carefully constructed whirred into motion. The trusts were activated, the endowment was transferred, and the gates of the Huntington Library, art collections, and Botanical Gardens were finally open to the public. The private paradise became a public treasure, and the woman who had been the subject of so much scandal was reborn as one of America's greatest benefactors. Her most audacious gamble, a love that defied convention, had ultimately yielded a dividend more valuable than any railroad stock, an immortal legacy of beauty, knowledge, and inspiration for all. Even in death, Arabella Huntington could not escape the whirlwind of controversy that had defined so much of her extraordinary life. When she passed away in her New York mansion in September 1924, she left behind not only one of the greatest private fortunes ever assembled, but also a final, meticulously crafted will that would ignite one last fierce legal battle. The document was a masterpiece of precision, reflecting a lifetime spent navigating the complexities of law and finance. Its central purpose was unequivocal: to protect and fully endow the Huntington Library, art collections, and Botanical Gardens, ensuring the public institution she had built with Henry would open its doors exactly as they had dreamed. Yet, to a coterie of disgruntled Huntington relatives, this will was not a noble act of philanthropy. It was the ultimate betrayal, a final diversion of the family's wealth away from bloodlines and into a cultural project that bore her name more than theirs. They saw not a benefactor, but a usurper, and they were prepared to fight in court for what they believed was their rightful inheritance. The legal challenges erupted almost immediately, echoing the very same disputes that had greeted her inheritance from Collis a quarter-century earlier. A coalition of Huntington nephews, nieces, and distant cousins came forward to contest the will, their arguments weaving a familiar tapestry of accusation and indignation. Their primary claims centered on the concept of undue influence, suggesting that Arabella, in her advanced age, had been manipulated by a circle of powerful advisors, lawyers, art dealers, and trustees who stood to gain from the establishment of the grand public institution. They argued these advisors had preyed upon an elderly woman's whims, persuading her to divert the family fortune into a vanity project rather than providing for her legitimate heirs. In their telling, the creation of the Huntington was not a visionary act, but a tragic swindle, the final chapter in a life they still viewed through the lens of her scandalous origins. Further fueling their case was the sheer, almost incomprehensible scale of the bequest to the institution. Arabella's will dedicated the overwhelming majority of her estate, a consolidated fortune built from two Huntington patriarchs, to funding the San Marino project. For the relatives, this was not generosity. It was an act of exclusion so vast it felt personally punitive. They contended that such a disproportionate allocation was irrational and could not reflect the true wishes of a woman concerned with her extended family. In the courtrooms, their lawyers painted a picture of a clan wronged, arguing that while philanthropy was commendable, this went too far, effectively disinheriting an entire branch of the Huntington family tree in favor of building a monument to Arabella's own contested legacy. The ensuing court proceedings were a protracted and very public affair, splashed across the society pages of newspapers from New York to San Francisco. It was a dramatic final spectacle, pitting the formidable legal machinery of the Huntington estate against the determined, if less powerful, challenge of the relatives. The case delved into the most intimate details of Arabella's final years, scrutinizing her mental state, her relationships with her advisors, and her every written instruction regarding the trust. Yet, as the evidence was presented, a clear and powerful narrative emerged, one that ultimately vindicated her completely. Testimony from her inner circle, supported by decades of her own correspondence and memoranda, revealed not a confused old woman being led astray, but a lucid, fiercely intelligent, and determined individual executing a plan she had developed with her husband over many years. The court found the evidence of her sound mind and clear intention to be overwhelming. Letters between Arabella and Henry, plans they had drawn up together for the institution, and her own detailed notes all demonstrated that the Huntington was not a last-minute fancy, but the culmination of a shared, lifelong ambition. The judges recognized that the advisors were not manipulators, but instruments, hired to execute the precise and legally sound wishes of their client. The claim of irrationality was swiftly dismissed. The court acknowledged that an individual had the absolute right to dispose of their property as they saw fit, and that dedicating a fortune to a permanent public benefit was a rational and praiseworthy act, not an aberrant one. One by one, the legal challenges were rejected, and the probate courts firmly upheld Arabella Huntington's last will and testament in its entirety. This final legal victory was far more than a procedural formality. It was the ultimate validation of her 3-decade journey to legitimacy and authority. The courts, the ultimate arbiters of society's rules, had looked upon her life's work and her final wishes and found them not just valid, but commendable. In upholding her will, they were effectively posthumously anointing her as the true and rightful steward of the Huntington legacy, a status she had earned through intelligence, partnership, and unwavering vision. The relatives who had sought to diminish her role were silenced by the force of law, their claims relegated to a footnote in the grand story she had written. The scandal that had first attached itself to her name in the 1870s was, at long last, permanently extinguished by a final, unassailable judgment. With the legal battles settled, the magnificent gates of the Huntington Library, art collections, and Botanical Gardens swung open to the public in 1928. The flawless execution of Arabella's plan ensured the institution was not just a collection of beautiful objects, but a fully endowed, financially secure center for learning and inspiration, exactly as she and Henry had envisioned. The income from the trust she had so carefully engineered provided a perpetual stream of funding for acquisitions, conservation, scholarships, and operations, guaranteeing that the institution would never need to compromise its mission or sell its treasures. Her meticulous planning had created a timeless vessel for their passions, a place where the whispers of old scandals are forever drowned out by the quiet rustle of book pages and the peaceful footsteps of visitors wandering through the gardens, enjoying the priceless gift she had fought so hard to protect and bestow upon the world. Today, the sprawling grounds of the Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens in San Marino, California, stand as the most powerful and poignant answer to every critic and every scandal that once swirled around Arabella Huntington's name. What was once their private 1,000-acre ranch is now one of the world's most revered cultural destinations, a place where the whispers of 19th-century drawing rooms are permanently silenced by the profound beauty and scholarship that greets over 1 million visitors each year. This is not a static monument frozen in time. It is a living, breathing, and ever-evolving institution that continues to grow according to the precise, passionate blueprint its founders laid out over a century ago. Every perfectly manicured garden path, every hushed library reading room, and every sunlit art gallery is a direct manifestation of Arabella's ultimate triumph, proof that a legacy built on love, intelligence, and a shared vision can utterly eclipse one built on gossip and judgment. The heart of this legacy, for many, remains the world-class art collection that Arabella so meticulously assembled. Walking through the galleries today, visitors come face to face with the very masterpieces she acquired through her legendary partnership with Joseph Duveen. Thomas Gainsborough's The Blue Boy and Thomas Lawrence's Pinky now hang in a purpose-built gallery, perpetually facing one another in a silent, glorious dialogue that continues to draw gasps of awe from crowds who line up just for a glimpse. These are not paintings hidden away for private enjoyment. They are shared public treasures, exactly as Arabella intended. The European art wing, filled with her acquisitions of Rembrandt, Van Dyck, and her exquisite collection of 18th century French decorative arts, feels less like a museum and more like a home, a testament to her belief that great art should be lived with and experienced intimately, a philosophy that now benefits everyone who walks through the doors. Equally transformative is the work of the Huntington Library, which has grown far beyond even Henry's ambitious dreams. The collection now holds over 11 million items, a staggering repository of human thought and creativity that serves as a magnet for scholars from across the globe. The same fellowship program Henry established continues to bring researchers to San Marino, where they live on site and spend months delving into original manuscripts, from that breathtaking Ellesmere Chaucer to the personal papers of literary giants like Jack London and Charles Bukowski. It is a place where a graduate student can request a folder containing letters written by George Washington 1 hour and examine a first edition of Shakespeare's plays the next, all thanks to an endowment that Arabella structured to make such profound access possible forever. This is the couple's belief in the power of knowledge made tangible, a research engine that continually generates new understanding of our past. Perhaps the most unexpectedly democratic aspect of their gift is the 120 acres of Botanical Gardens. What began as their personal passion project has blossomed into 16 themed gardens, each a unique world unto itself. The Japanese garden, with its historic moon bridge and serene koi ponds, offers a place of quiet contemplation. The desert garden, one of the largest and oldest collections of cacti and succulents in the world, presents a stunning landscape of surreal forms and resilient beauty. Families picnic on the lawns, couples stroll through the rose garden, and students sketch beneath the canopy of the jungle garden. This is the Huntington's genius in its purest form, a place where high culture intersects with simple human joy, where there is no barrier to entry for finding peace and inspiration in a beautiful landscape. It is a truly public park of the highest order, a direct reflection of Arabella's own journey from wanting a private refuge to building a public haven. The institution's impact extends far beyond its physical borders through groundbreaking exhibitions, scholarly publications, and educational programs that reach into schools and communities across Los Angeles and the world. It is a center for botanical conservation, preserving rare and endangered plant species. It is a publisher of academic works that shape our understanding of history and literature. And it remains a place of relentless acquisition, with curators continually adding to the collections, following the founder's mandate to never let the institution become a static relic, but to keep it dynamic and relevant. The fortune that Arabella so fiercely protected continues to fund this work, a perpetual motion machine of philanthropy that ensures admission remains free for all on the first Thursday of every month, honoring her own humble beginnings and her belief that beauty and knowledge should be accessible to everyone, not just the elite. Ultimately, a visit to the Huntington today is to walk through the materialization of a redeemed reputation. The woman who was once dismissed as a scandalous mistress is now remembered as one of America's greatest cultural benefactors. The complex, forbidden love story that so captivated and horrified society is now a footnote to a far greater narrative about visionary philanthropy and the creation of a lasting public good. The gardens, the library, and the art collections stand as their shared, final word on the matter, a breathtakingly beautiful argument that the true measure of a life is not found in the gossip it generates, but in the beauty it leaves behind for others to discover. Arabella and Henry Huntington built a palace not for themselves, but for the future, and in doing so, they secured the only kind of immortality that truly matters. The truth about Arabella Huntington's life is shrouded in layers of gossip, speculation, and deliberate obfuscation, making the historian's task less about finding a single definitive answer and more about carefully weighing probabilities in a world where she mastered the art of controlling her own narrative. The central, most persistent mystery remains the paternity of her son, Archer. Officially, he was the child of her first husband, John Archer Worsham, a man who appears in the historical record with such fleeting presence that he seems almost deliberately vague. The timeline, however, tells a compelling story. Arabella married Worsham in 1869, and Archer was born the following year in 1870. This hasty marriage, following nearly a decade as Collis Huntington's companion, aligns perfectly with the common Gilded Age practice of a reparatory marriage, a strategic union designed to provide a child of an affair with a name and a veneer of social legitimacy. Worsham, often described as a man of modest means, effectively vanished from their lives shortly after, further fueling the belief that his role was contractual, a business arrangement to protect the interests of all parties involved. The evidence extends far beyond mere timing into the realm of action and inheritance. Collis Huntington's behavior towards Archer was undeniably that of a father, not a distant family friend. From the boy's earliest days, Collis was intimately involved in his upbringing, directing his education, immersing him in the world of business, and treating him as his obvious heir. Most conclusively, Collis's will made Archer a principal beneficiary of his immense fortune, a move that bypassed other relatives and sent a clear, if unspoken, message to the world. For those in their inner circle, this was not a secret. It was an open understanding. The motivation was clear-cut. In the brutally rigid social hierarchy of the 19th century, an officially illegitimate child would have been forever barred from elite society, his prospects for marriage and career irreparably tarnished. By giving Archer the Worsham name, Arabella and Collis purchased his future, granting him the unquestioned respectability required to inherit and lead the dynasty they were building. The nature of Arabella's first marriage to Collis's brother, also named Henry, is another knot of confusion often tangled by sensationalists. This short-lived union, which ended with the younger Henry's death, is sometimes incorrectly cited as the source of the nephew scandal. In reality, her marriage to Henry E. Huntington, Collis's nephew, was a completely separate relationship that occurred decades later. Conflating the two Henrys creates a dramatic but false narrative of a woman sequentially marrying brothers, a story that is factually incorrect but speaks to the tendency to amplify the scandal surrounding her life. The truth is already astonishing enough without this error. Her actual marriage to the nephew was shocking precisely because it was a choice, a deliberate turning away from societal expectation toward personal fulfillment, not the continuation of a pre-existing familial entanglement. Perhaps the most complex myth to unravel is the true dynamic of her relationship with Collis Huntington. Was she a brilliant, ambitious partner or a cunning, manipulative gold digger? The evidence strongly suggests she was the former, though her contemporaries often accused her of the latter. The gold digger narrative is a simplistic trope that ignores the duration, depth, and mutual benefit of their partnership. This was not a brief affair. It was a 30-year alliance in which Arabella proved herself indispensable. She was not a passive recipient of luxury. She was Collis's business secretary, his hostess, his household manager, and his confidante. She provided the social polish and organizational genius he lacked, creating a refined, efficient home that served as an extension of his corporate power. In return, he provided the security she craved, and most importantly, an unparalleled education in high finance. He trusted her with his correspondence, his deal-making, and the inner workings of his empire. This was not the transaction of a kept woman. It was the apprenticeship of a future titan. The whispers of her being a manipulative seductress who controlled an old man are also undermined by the consistent accounts of her character. Those who knew her described a woman of formidable intelligence, steely composure, and impeccable, almost reserved, manners, not a flamboyant temptress. She wielded influence through competence and discretion, not through flirtation or drama. Her power came from being the person who could get things done, who understood the nuances of both a stock report and a seating chart. The greatest testament to her true role is found in the outcomes. After Collis's death, she didn't fade into luxury. She expertly managed one of the largest fortunes in the world, doubled it through her own astute investments, and then partnered with Henry to build a cultural legacy that endures. A mere manipulator could not have achieved this. It required a master strategist with a profound understanding of power, finance, and human nature. The myths surrounding Arabella Huntington reveal less about her and more about the society that created them, a world deeply uncomfortable with a woman who dared to acquire power not through birth, but through sheer intellect and nerve, and who had the audacity to choose her own happiness over its rigid, unforgiving rules. Arabella Huntington's story endures not because it is a simple tale of rags to riches, but because it is a far more complex and human drama about the relentless pursuit of agency in a world determined to deny it. In an era when women were expected to be decorative, dependent, and demure, Arabella wielded her intelligence, charm, and ambition like surgical instruments, dissecting the rigid social hierarchy to claim a place at its very pinnacle. She fascinates us because she represents the ultimate act of self-creation. She was not born into her role, she authored it, line by carefully calculated line, transforming herself from Arabella Yarrington of Richmond into the undisputed queen of Fifth Avenue. Her life is a masterclass in strategic patience and perception management, proving that identity itself can be the most valuable currency for those clever enough to mint it. At her core, Arabella embodies a potent and timeless symbol of female power operating within and ultimately triumphing over a system designed to suppress it. The Gilded Age presented women with a brutally narrow set of options: marry well for security, remain a spinster reliant on family charity, or face destitution. Arabella, however, navigated a fourth, largely uncharted path. She became a mistress, a role of profound precarity that she transformed into a position of unique influence. This was not a surrender to circumstance, but a strategic occupation of a gray area. From that shadowy perch, she gained an education in high finance and elite social codes that was unavailable to most women of her time, even those of higher birth. She turned a traditionally powerless position into a platform for unparalleled learning, using her proximity to power not just to observe, but to absorb, analyze, and eventually command it. Her story captivates because it is one of audacious reclamation, where the rules meant to confine her became the very tools she used to build her fortress. Her profound mastery of reinvention is perhaps her most modern and relatable trait. In today's world of personal branding and curated digital identities, we understand the power of crafting a narrative. Arabella was a pioneer of this concept, executing it with a precision that would be impressive even now. She seamlessly shed each previous identity like a skin, evolving from the daughter of a carpenter to the respected Mrs. Worsham, then to the powerful widow of Collis P. Huntington, and finally to the adored wife of Henry E. Huntington. With each transformation, she deepened her authority and expanded her influence, never looking back and never apologizing. She understood that in the theater of high society, perception was reality, and she directed her own performance with flawless execution, convincing a skeptical audience to finally accept her not as an outsider, but as the leading lady. This relentless drive makes the motivations behind her greatest scandal so profoundly compelling. Her marriage to Henry was far more than a romantic rebellion. It was the ultimate fusion of her personal and strategic selves. After a lifetime of calculated moves made for security and status, she finally made a choice driven primarily by the heart. She risked everything she had spent decades building: her hard-won social standing, her reputation, and a significant portion of her fortune, for a love that society deemed forbidden. This decision elevates her story from a cold-blooded narrative of ambition into a deeply human epic of desire. It reveals that beneath the steely exterior of a financial titan and art connoisseur beat the heart of a woman willing to bet it all on an emotional connection so powerful it outweighed every rational calculation. Ultimately, her enduring fascination lies in her victorious legacy. The whispers that once defined her, the speculation about her son's paternity, the condemnation of her marriages have been completely drowned out by the profound cultural silence of the Huntington's Library, the vibrant colors of its gardens, and the awe-inspiring gaze of its masterpieces. She achieved the most complete form of redemption possible. She rendered her scandals irrelevant. We are captivated by her story because it is a testament to the idea that a life lived with audacious intention can outweigh a lifetime of gossip. She used every tool at her disposal: love, scandal, wealth, and an iron will, not just to secure her place in history, but to build a palace for beauty and knowledge, and then hand the keys to the world. Arabella Huntington forces us to reconsider what truly defines a person. Is it the rumors that swirl around them in their lifetime, or the timeless, tangible good they leave behind long after they are gone? Her life is her magnificent answer. Arabella Huntington's journey stands as one of the most remarkable narratives of self-invention in American history, a testament to the sheer force of will and intellect that could, against all odds, reshape destiny itself. From her humble beginnings in the shadow of the Civil War South, where every day was a lesson in scarcity and survival, she ascended to the absolute zenith of Gilded Age power, not through birthright, but through a masterful understanding of the subtle currencies that truly governed her world: charm, discretion, and an unparalleled financial acumen. Her life was a continuous act of brilliant translation, turning the vulnerability of being a kept woman into a doctoral program in wealth management, and transforming the social stigma of scandal into the unassailable authority of a cultural titan. She did not simply climb the social ladder. She built an entirely new one, rung by deliberate rung, and then pulled it up after her. Her story is ultimately a profound meditation on the nature of power, how it is acquired, how it is wielded, and how it is legitimized. In an era that sought to confine women to the periphery of influence, Arabella carved out a center of gravity all her own. She understood that true power in the Gilded Age was a hybrid creature, part financial brute force and part social refinement. She mastered both. With Collis Huntington, she learned the mechanics of building a continental empire of steel and steam. With Henry Huntington, she perfected the art of deploying that fortune to shape the very landscape of a region and the soul of its culture. She demonstrated that influence could flow as effectively through the quiet curation of a dinner party for senators as it could through the negotiation of a railroad bond, proving that the drawing room was often just an extension of the boardroom. At the heart of her astonishing saga lies the tension between calculation and passion, a duality she never sought to resolve, but instead wielded in tandem. For decades, her every move was a masterpiece of strategic patience: the discreet mistress, the loyal secretary, the respectable widow. She played the long game with a chess master's precision, always thinking several moves ahead. Yet her greatest and most defining act was one that defied all strategy: her decision to marry Henry Edwards Huntington. In that choice, the meticulously constructed facade gave way to an authentic and daring vulnerability. She risked the very respectability she had spent a lifetime building for a love that society deemed taboo, proving that even the most disciplined architect of fate is still subject to the unruly human heart. This was not a contradiction in her story, but its culmination. The moment her calculated pursuit of security finally converged with her deep, personal desire for fulfillment. Her legacy, therefore, refuses any simple categorization. She cannot be neatly filed away as a gold digger, a seductress, or even just a philanthropist. She was all these things, and none of them exclusively. She was a woman who used the limited tools available to her to secure unimaginable power, and then used that power not merely for personal luxury, but to build something enduring and beautiful for the public good. The whispers about her son's paternity, the scandals surrounding her marriages, these once salacious topics, now seem small and faint when standing in the serene galleries of the Huntington, surrounded by the masterpieces she gathered and the knowledge she helped preserve. She achieved the most complete form of historical vindication possible. She rendered the gossip irrelevant, overshadowing it with a positive, tangible legacy that continues to educate and inspire millions. In the end, Arabella Huntington secured her place in history not as a mistress or a wife, but as a foundational architect. She helped architect the physical infrastructure of modern Southern California through the railroads and utilities she and Henry controlled. She architected one of the world's great cultural institutions from the ground up. But most importantly, she architected her own identity, crafting a life of profound meaning and impact from a set of circumstances that offered very little. Her story is a powerful reminder that legacy is not something we are given, but something we build choice by daring choice, masterpiece by acquired masterpiece, defiant act of love by defiant act of love. She looked at the rigid rules of her world, understood them completely, and then decided which ones were worth following and which were worth breaking to create a life that was truly and entirely her own.